interview is about Indo-Soviet cultural relations, and I'm going to start off with a couple biographical questions and then some questions that are more targeted about RK Films and relationship with the Soviet Union, film studios and actresses. Sometimes some of my questions might seem a little obvious, but I'm just phrasing it that way so that I don't get a yes/no answer. So
okay.
I might already know a little bit, but I have to phrase the question.
Okay.
That way. Okay. Would you please tell me your name, your birth date, how our relationship, and where we are sitting today?
My name is Randhir Kapoor. I'm the oldest son of Mr. Raj Kapoor, the founder of RK Films and Studios. I'm an actor, producer, and director, filmmaker by profession. And I head the RK Films and Studio division after my father's demise. My father was a very, very famous actor in his times, a very famous actor, producer, director, and a legendary star and filmmaker who took all his films to great popularity heights, especially in the Soviet Union, the Middle East, and the Far East. In those days, very many films didn't reach faraway lands. I'm talking about the early 50s. In the early 50s, my father's film Avara, which was later dubbed as Brodyaga in Russian, became one of its biggest ever film hits in the entire Soviet bloc. And till today, Avara and our film Shri 420, Gaspadin 420, is a legendary super duper hit which each and every Russian knows about. I have just come back after having the honor of being on the International Film Jury at the Moscow Film Festival 2016. And it gave me immense pleasure to know that even 30 years after my father's demise, the Russians love Raj Kapoor so much. The entire Soviet bloc knows about Raj Kapoor and the legendary figure and the actor that he was, and he is still loved a great deal. I deem it a great honor and a privilege to be his son and to belong to a gentleman, to a family who's loved so much by the entire Soviet bloc.
Why do you think your father's films were so, and him as an actor himself, director, were so beloved by the Soviet people?
Well, I've been trying to figure this out for many years, that why, what is special? I think in the early 50s, I think our film went there in 52 or 53. In those days, the Soviet cinema was basically a propaganda cinema, showing war and the fruits of war and the Soviet bloc. There was no glamour, there were no songs, there was no romance, there was no... Raj Kapoor films brought dreams into their lives. He was a dream merchant. It brought hopes of joy. There's something beyond in life besides war and the outcome of the various facets of war all the time. And Raj Kapoor's films showed hope, which the Soviets had never seen before. It showed them love, hope, desire, because his films generally had a very positive and sweetness about his stories and the films that he made. And we were also struggling. We had just got our independence from the Britishers India, by we I mean Indians. India had got its independence from the Britishers, and after a great deal of struggle and hardship, we were also very young, a very young country, trying to stand up on its feet and trying to become independent and hopes of a great future, which we saw in ourselves. And we were hoping that the next day would be a better day than today. I think this is what the Soviets liked.
And how difficult was it for RK Films to distribute these films in the Soviet Union? Like you said just now, Soviets at that time was kind of a propaganda machine. Was it your father, Randhir Kapoor, was it his initiative to bring the films there, or was it the opposite? Was the Soviet Union actively trying to screen the films? Who took the first initiative in order to bring the films to the Soviet Union?
I think it was easier in those days. In the Soviet bloc, it was everything was government owned, state owned. So was cinema and film studios and films, and there was nothing independent. So there was a Sov export film which imported films from India. That was the only source to get your films into Russia. And they bought films which suited their mindset. They wouldn't buy all kinds of films. Films that did not suit their ideologies, they did not buy. And they bought them on outright basis and they filmed it. Like for instance, Avara had gone to the Russian film festivals in, I think, 53 or 54. I forget which exactly was the year. And it became such an instant hit that the Russians bought the film. And they bought the internegative always because they made their own prints. And then in the 50s, they made 2,000 prints, which was unheard of for any kind of language or Russian film ever. They released 2,000 prints of Avara because it was so popular. It had music, it had hope, it had desire, it had romance. And Raj Kapoor and Nargis became big, huge stars. They bought Raj Kapoor's subsequent films like Shri 420 and others because everything was imported through Sov export films. And ever since their opening up, whatever they call it, in '91, I don't think there's any export of Indian films into Russia. There's no buyer for it because the entire bloc, the CIS, what they call themselves now, has been flooded with American films. They have only American films now. There are none from India or any other country because the Americans distribute their own films. They made their own theaters, multiplexes, their own distribution network, their own media they control. They can get into publicity for them on television, into newspapers. So we are finding it very difficult to take our films there. And there are hardly any buyers. If there are any, very, very few.
And the films that RK Films, Shri Solis and Awara, were these dubbed or did they have subtitles?
No, they were dubbed. Avara was dubbed as Brudyaga, and Shri 420 became Gaspatin 420. And they were dubbed also, and previously they were para-dubbed. And then later on, because of the popularity of the films, they started dubbing the films.
What do you mean by para-dub?
Para-dub means you underscore the volume of the original soundtrack and interpret it in Russian of what the gentleman is speaking, the character is speaking. That's called paradub. So it was released as paradub earlier and then dubbed in Russian language and various other languages.
So it's dubbed in more than just Russian.
Yes, I have had the pleasure of seeing Avara in Russian, and the lip sync is so good. That's fantastic. I think Mr. Raj Kapoor is speaking himself.
Are the songs?
No, the songs were in original Hindi because they still like the music and the sing and the song and the dance and everything else.
If I can just backtrack a little bit, I was going to ask you if you can describe your first encounters with Soviet culture as a child.
Well, as a child, I knew my father was a very famous actor in India. And it was a great joy for me to learn that he was a very, very famous actor in a country called Russia, though I'd never been to Russia. And every Russian, whoever came to India, came to Bombay, and especially came to Bombay to meet with Mr. Raj Kapoor. It was like a pilgrimage for them. And it tickled me no end that somebody from a foreign land who didn't speak our Indian language, who barely spoke English and always had interpreters with them, was so fascinated meeting Raj Kapoor. So those are my early memories of Russia. And then when I grew up, my father took me to Moscow. And of course, it was a great land and very fascinating place to go to. It was very different from the countries I had ever visited. And it tickled me and it tickled, and in the sense it gave me a great sense of excitement and wonder, at bewilderment to know that they loved Raj Kapoor all the way from India so much. There used to be hundreds of people waiting outside the hotel where he would come, and they would carry him on his shoulders and they would clap. There was a very a different tradition in those days, that whenever they appreciated something they would clap. And whenever Mr. Raj Kapoor was walking on the streets also, people around would stand up and clap. So I would also clap along with them.
What year was that?
It must be in the early 60s.
So you went to Moscow. Did you travel to any other during that trip, or?
No, not that time. Subsequently, in the 70s, I traveled to Uzbekistan. They used to have a Tashkent Film Festival there. 1 year the Russian Film Festival was in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, and the alternating year it was held in Moscow. And it was great fun. And the Indian delegation was the biggest always, because obviously Mr. Raj Kapoor introduced Indian cinema to the Russians, and the Russians loved the sing and song and dance and romance and dreams, that the kind of cinema that we make, which they had never seen before in their lives. And subsequently lots and lots of Indian films went to Russia, and our Indian delegation was the biggest. And I remember from Moscow we would go to Leningrad, St. Petersburg, and the alternating year when we went to Tashkent we would go to Samarkand or to Bukhara. And you get to see all these wonderful places and the wonderful people that they are there in Russia and now in Uzbekistan and other parts of the thing. The kind of love they had for my father was always amazed me. And obviously it was a great piece of joy for me to know that also. And recently I have just come back from the Moscow International Film Festival, where I had the privilege to be on the international jury. To know that even 30 years after he's gone, and Avara released in the early 50s, and we are in 2016, even 65 years since the film was made, and so many generations have passed, and they still love Raj Kapoor so much.
Can you describe the larger geopolitical relationship that existed with between India and the Soviet Union during your young adult years, and what role do you think the strong relationship in the world of cinema between the Soviet Union and India that developed out of your father's films, what kind of role do you think this played in the larger geopolitical relationship during the Cold War between India and the Soviet Union?
Well, like I told you earlier in my interview, that I think the Russians took to Indian cinema, especially because of the content of the films, which had song and dance and romance and comedy and hope, desire, a better future for tomorrow, which I think the Russians had not seen in their cinema at that time, because their cinema was basically only propaganda kind of cinema. All their films focused around the war, the aftermath of the war, or it had everything to do with the war only. The background was always the war. It was never a social film. So they found the Indian films very, very different, and they liked the story content, like especially in the eastern section of Russia. For instance, like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and other places. They are more like Indians. They are more emotional. They are more family-minded. They think about their brothers and sisters and fathers and mothers and family more than the European side of the Russians. So for them, they identified with that kind of cinema. And we had a very good political relationships with Pandit Nehru and Khrushchev and subsequent leaders. When we have shared a great friendship with Russia, and they have helped us also in their in our nation building, and our cultural ties with Russia have been always very good.
Do any RK film productions feature Soviet actors and actresses, and if so, which ones?
In the early 70s, in 1970, my father made a picture called Mera Naam Joker, My Name is Clown. And it had a part, it was in chapters, different facets of the Joker's life, and in which we needed a circus. So we brought the Soviet circus from Moscow to come to India and participate in the film. And we had identified an actress who was a very famous ballerina in her times, in her youth, Sana Ryabinskina. And we have had the privilege to work with her in our film, and she was greatly appreciated in India, and subsequently, of course, in Russia, because she was their famous ballerina. And we've had a very joyful and eventful collaboration with them, and they were very, very nice to us, and they stayed here for quite a long time. We had 100+ unit from Russia.
And how difficult was it? At that time there was quite a bit of control in the Soviet Union over who was allowed to exit and go abroad and who wasn't. Did RK Films, how were they able to cast these Soviet actors and actresses, and how were they able to secure kind of the agreement to allow the state to allow them to come and act in the film?
I think this was to a great extent because of Mr. Raj Kapoor's popularity in the Soviet Union, Russia. And I think he found it easy because of his personality, his popularity, and people identified with him, including the politicians and the government. So it was quite smooth sailing. And because, like I told you, India and Russia had good cultural relations, so it was quite smooth to get them here. It was a little expensive, but very good.
What was the popularity or the storyline with the Moscow circus in Mera Naam Joker? How did that go over with the Indian public?
Oh, the Indians loved it also. In the film, it showed that the Russian circus has come to Bombay, and the clown was working in the circus, and he joins the Indian circus, the Soviet circus, and how you see romance. Any emotion has no language. A tear or a smile has no language. You can easily come to know what you say. So does love. So the language was there. There was a barrier, and the clown falls in love with the Russian girl. But then again, there are difficulties and cultural differences that they could not culminate into their friendship, into marriage. So it was a story of something of that time.
Besides Mera Naam Joker, were there any other productions that involved Soviet actors and actresses in Indian films?
Years later, my uncle made a film called Ajuba, which had participation from the Russian Soviet film industry in Uzbekistan. I think there it was called the Black Prince, or the Chorny Prince, or whatever they call it there. And it had various actors from Russia, and some technicians, and also from Uzbek actors and technicians, and I think there was a director also had come from there. But I won't be able to throw much light on it because I was not actively involved in the production of that film.
Was that was the last Indo-Soviet production, 1991?
Yeah, almost. My friend, Mr. Umesh Mehra, has made about 3 or 4 films with them. They were from Eagle Films, and they have made 3 or 4 films. I don't know exactly the number of films, which casted, I think, Mithun Chakrabarti in some of them, who was subsequently a very famous actor also after Raj Kapoor. Mithun took disco dancer to Russia, and the Russians had never seen a disco or a dance like that. So that picture again showed the Russians salsa and dancing, and they've never seen an American film. They've not seen John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever or something, and disco dancing was like Saturday Night Fever. And I like I told you, it was different for them. So lots of Hindi films went there later on also, and they had collaborated with the Indians. Now it's becoming a little difficult in the sense because we have no export of our films to Russia. And henceforth, the language barrier and the cultural barriers, I hope they start again.
So would you say that after 1991, the cultural barriers have increased between India and former Soviet socialist republics?
I wouldn't say they've increased, but our films are not going there, so I do not know. They have not seen the new India, let's say it that way. Because our films are not there in the last 25 years. Very few films have gone there. In certain pockets where Indians are there, they show them. They show them on television, I think. But they are not majorly popular anymore as they were in the times of Mr. Raj Kapoor.
And on that note, I did read in the news that I guess it would be your nephew Randhir Kapoor is going to actually play a role in a Russian production.
I wouldn't know. I'm sorry.
Okay. I saw the trailer to this film, and so I thought that maybe you could put that film into kind of historical context, but...
No, I wouldn't be able to tell you, throw light on that.
I want to know, what were the greatest challenges, would you say, during the Soviet Union? You were talking about all the lovely things and the popularity and the great reception, warm reception that Indian films had, RK films had in the Soviet Union. What were some of the challenges the RK films faced, or you faced in working with the Soviet side? Were there any challenges, or?
No, I think it was a very pleasant a very pleasant experience to have worked with those people. Our only challenge was that the language is a barrier, and we always had interpreters. And then, 65 years ago, we didn't have so many interpreters in India who could fluently speak Russian. Now there are very many. The world has become very small. And that's about all. They were very, very loving and very nice and very cooperative.
And now, today I visited the Russian Cultural Center, and I believe that's where Svetlana Roshenko and the documentary on Randhir Kapoor was screened here in Mumbai. And I was wondering, what is your involvement today with the Russian Cultural Center or with Indo-Russian relations?
Well, my involvement with the Soviet Cultural Center now is very, very cordial, and they are very friendly with me. Thanks to, of course, Mr. Raj Kapoor and his contribution to bringing the two countries together and closer together, and the love and affection that the Russians have for Raj Kapoor. And I have a very good relationship, very friendly and relationship with the Cultural Center, and the director of the Cultural Center is Mr. Devanteev, also is a great friend of mine, and they're buddies.
And just one more question, if I can backtrack a little bit. During the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the Soviet Union was publishing and bringing in a lot of Soviet books on all sorts of topics, from math and science to fiction to novels in India. And I was wondering whether you became acquainted or read any Soviet published literature in your childhood.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't. I had more Western influence because I studied there, and I was not exposed to that.
Okay, well, I think I have covered all my questions.
Thank you. I hope I've satisfied you.
And thank you very much for your patience with this interview. And that's it.
Thank you.